Who was Ruth? If you'd like to be turning to the book of Ruth, we'll start in chapter 1. As I answer that question, Ruth was a Moabite woman who married into the family of Elimelech through one of his two sons. After she had been married for a while, her husband died, her father-in-law died, and her brother-in-law died, leaving her, Naomi, her mother-in-law, and Orpah, her sister-in-law, widows. As I titled this lesson, The Characteristics of Ruth, the following is a showcase of three of her many characteristics. The first characteristic is loyalty. Ruth was loyal when she stayed with her mother-in-law after her husband had died. Please follow along as I read Ruth 1, 6 through 18. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt kindly with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "Surely we will return with you to your people." And Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughter, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." After Naomi's husband died, Ruth's husband died, and Orpah's husband died, Naomi told Ruth to go back to her own country. But because of her loyalty, she stayed with Naomi and showed that she was a very loyal person. She was loyal when her and her mother-in-law went into a country where she would face harsh prejudice. In verses 15 through 18, I'm not going to read that I am going to read that, my bad. And she said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. The Israelite people were known not to be too kind to people that weren't from their own country. Ruth, being a Moabite, was sure to suffer harsh prejudice and harsh treatment from the Israelite people, yet she showed her loyalty by following Naomi into Israel, Judah. She showed loyalty when she did what she had to do just so her and her mother-in-law could survive. Could you go to Ruth 2, verses 1 and 2? There was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go into the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Naomi was too old to go out and work in the fields herself, and how else are they going to go get food? So Ruth had to go out and work in the fields herself so that they could have food to put on their table. She showed great loyalty doing this. The next characteristic of Ruth is that she was loving. She was loving when she chose her mother-in-law over her sister-in-law of the same nationality. That's found in verses 15 through 18. I won't read that again. But her sister-in-law was of the same nationality as her, and her mother-in-law Ruth was of the country of Judah. But she chose she chose Naomi out of loving her to go to Judah. She was also loving when she obeyed her mother-in-law and caught the eye of Boaz. Please turn with me to Ruth 3, verses 1 through 18. I'm not going to read all of this, but Naomi tells Ruth about Boaz, which is a man of her, or a relative of her husband's, and she tells Ruth that she should go lay at the feet of his bed so that he may notice her. She's loving when she does exactly what her mother-in-law Naomi says. And lastly, she is loving when she married Boaz. Please turn with me to Ruth chapter 4, verses 3 through 17. Or 13 through 17, my bad. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi." And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. The last characteristic that I'm going to be discussing is Ruth was lowly. Lowly means humble. Ruth was lowly when she gave up all she had in her country and left with Naomi. Again, that's found in verses 15 through 18. She was also lowly when she went and worked in the fields because her mother-in-law couldn't work. Ruth 2, 1 through 23. And she was lowly when she did everything Naomi and the Lord willed her to do, the whole book of Ruth. Throughout the book of Ruth, we find numerous instances of Ruth doing everything Naomi and everything the Lord willed her to do. In conclusion, Ruth not only possessed these traits, but many others. For sake of time, we will not look into all of these, but they include strength, courage, faithfulness, selflessness, and there are still many more. We need to exercise all these traits. It is God's will for us to be all of these things. We must be loyal so that we only serve him. God is love, so to be loving is to be like God. And lastly, to be lowly is to be humble, and we must be humble to put God first and ourselves behind him. If you are not doing these things and are not a Christian, we encourage you to make the decision to become part of God's family. If you are a Christian and are having trouble with anything, we ask that you come forward as we stand and sing.